For those of you that don't know, I'm Tom Dyer. I'm president here at Argosy University, Seattle. And it's my pleasure today to talk about degree completion in the United States, in these United States of America, which I've entitled Seizing the Brass Ring. It's all about what's the prize. So here we go. So quiz. We'll start with a quiz. So why even bother going to college? That's our first question. We could go with choice A, to become an enlightened citizen and contribute meaningfully to a democratic society. We could go B, to become a Christian theologian and minister to the less fortunate and unenlightened. C, to develop new agricultural technologies to feed growing populations in a profitable manner. Or D, to get your ticket to the middle class punched and to live happily ever after. Now, at different points in our history, each one of those answers has been true. And they sort of evolve, and as we talk a little tiny bit about the history of higher education, I'll touch on that stuff. So how much? What's it cost? Well, first off, before I even get to that, you guys all subscribe to Newsweek, right? So this comes out last week. Is college a lousy investment, right? I went and picked up my copy at Bulldog News because I wanted to learn if it was a lousy investment. And what, it's a nice general article with no data, but it puts something out that has become a discussion in the United States of America. A lot of it is tied to the notion of student debt. And increasing student debt, as we've watched over the last 50 to 70 years, the shift in our idea of what education is about in the United States from being a public good to a private commodity. We said rather than we think as a society we benefit from educating our citizens, we go, no, these young people are going to make a lot of money, so they should pay for it. And so increasingly over those times there's less grant money available, and those types of things, and more loan money. People end up with bigger piles of debt. And I'm not going to answer the question today, is it a lousy investment? But the simple answer is, to some people it probably will be. And nobody more than the person that goes to school and does not graduate. Because that is the brass ring that we'll be talking about. So what's it cost? Inflation factors, general medical college tuition. Here's some trend lines you can look at from 1978 through 2008. And you can see general costs, there's been inflation, the blue line going up. Medical costs, as we all know, your copay went up. Has gone up even more, but there you go. Higher education, 3 times the cost of living since 1978. It's going up every year, way more. Here's a more recent slide. There you go. Once again, this is goes through 2011, and nothing's changing. You're not seeing tuition and fees going down. And in fact, we know it's happening at a state level, in this state in particular, but it's all across the country. State funding for schools is just going through the floor. The University of Washington, where I graduated, their tuition has gone up. In the last 2 years, it went up 14% and 20%. And for us as an institution, when I started out in private school, I used to have people say to me, why are you so expensive compared to, because they're used to, in Seattle, state schools. But right now, for our bachelor's degree, we're just barely more expensive on an annual basis than the University of Washington in-state students. It's a radical change in terms of what's going on in college. But that's a trend line that has not stopped in the last 20 years, and I don't know that it's going to stop real soon. So why go? I mean, it's so expensive. Why even bother doing it? Well, our friends at the Census Bureau has made a lot of nice slides that we'll see here. But if you look, work experience and average annual earnings of workers by educational attainment, right? So here you go. Here's a bachelor's degree, $52,000, right? And this is full-time all year round workers, high school graduate, $30,000. It's not quite double, but it's pretty close. Average earnings of full-time year-round workers is proportion of average earnings high school graduates, and you look what's going on over the last about 25 years. The gap between the average earning for a bachelor's degree, associate's degree, advanced degree is increasing all the time. So when students think about the idea going to college because they want to be the ticket to the middle class, our fourth our fourth choice. That's a lot of what's going on. Another slide, synthetic work-life earnings estimates for full-time folks. Here you go. High school graduate, 1.2 million bucks. Bachelor's degree, 2.1 million bucks. You can even buy a boat for that much more money. Of course, you'll spend all your money on the boat. This is a more recent slide. That last slide was a couple years back. This shows through 2011. Once again, you're seeing the same basic trends going on. It's a huge difference between high school and bachelor's degrees. And so even though when you look at most people, when they get their bachelor's degrees, lots of people, the majority of people, don't work in the field they graduated. That has become the entry point for work, a lot of work in the United States. An example of that, my mom was a secretary. She worked for the insurance commissioner's office in Olympia, Washington. And she went to secretarial school. That was what you needed, the skills you needed for that job. We don't even have secretaries anymore. We have administrative assistants now. And I can tell you, we don't hire one that doesn't have a bachelor's degree. They can't even apply. And that's not, and it's more appropriate at our college here than some places, but there's lots of jobs now where that bachelor's degree is being used as a screening mechanism, even though it may not have anything to do with his job skills needed for the job. History of education in these United States. Harvard, first college in America, 1636. I did not attend that year. It was a couple years after that. Our first private school, William Mary's our first public school in 1693. So we've been doing higher education for a while in America. We go from there, in 1862 is the next big thing. And the land-grant colleges, they didn't really go there like that. That's not their public transportation at the time. In Europe, in Germany in particular, there was science technology education going on that was not going on in the United States. If you look at William and Mary, particularly Harvard, there really were two main things being studied, theology and the law. That was what you went to college for. And so this idea with the land grants, it was tied to scientific learning. And specifically, there's one in each state, and there's supposed to be some benefit to the local population in that state in terms of agricultural benefit. They are going to figure out how to make wheat grow better or avoid mad cow disease or whatever it may be. The GI Bill, 1945. 1945, what happens is America wins World War II. Good for us. And a bunch of guys come home, and the government is looking at all these people that are about to come home and be unemployed people and goes, well, this will be bad because we just had a major depression that ran for 10 years that we really only cured it, not by building cabins and trails out in the woods, but by having a big war. That became the engine to fund the country. So we don't want to just put these guys back on the street. Let's let them go to college. What a great thing. So the GI Bill suddenly goes into effect, and you've got all kinds of people that are going to college that never went before. We'll see in a few slides how that trend line went in terms of population. And this also is really, really the entry point of the federal government into higher education. When you think about that, up till this point, there's some involvement, but really not much, where this is the point there starts to become federal money tied into higher education, which that changes the game. Because if the federal money is going to be given, at some point they're going to want to go, well, how's it being spent? What are we doing with the taxpayers' money? Then we get to the 60s. And for those of you, this fellow right here, I believe that's Neil Armstrong, who died about 2 weeks ago. John F. Kennedy was the president of the United States, and he said, let's go to the moon. And he also said at that time, let's increase who's going to college. We need to increase our college graduates that can do this kind of work, this high technology, this science work, and we are going to fund it like we had never funded it before. So now it wasn't just GIs, there was now financial aid available to just regular folks. Government money where you could get grants, you could get government loans, all those kinds of things that make college more available than it had ever been, more accessible. As a GI Bill, you saw an expansion of for-profit education For-profit education has been around since the Revolutionary War, but once the government put some money out there, you saw more schools starting to go, okay, we can do things to work with GIs. And for-profit education it changed big time in about 1990-91 in terms of that's when you first started seeing large education corporations like DeVry, University of Phoenix, and that were supposed to be mom and pop operations. So that was a fundamental change in some of what's going on in higher education. So if you look at this, here we go. Degree granting institutions by control and type of institution, selected years, 1949 through 2009. But you go, okay, we have in total in 1949, 1,551 institutions of higher education. That's it, all of America. Here we go to 2009, 4,409. That's some pretty significant growth over 50 years. In other words, this is what federal government funding things does to higher education. It triples the amount of institutions we have. For-profit institutions, 316. We go to 1,104 by 2009. Big change. Who goes? And this shows what's going on from 1880 to 1970 in terms of total education of our population. The white population is, I believe, the dotted line. And so you had 8 years of education was the average in 1880 for the white population, 7.5 for the total population. So if you look at that amount of education continues to rise the entire time. It becomes kind of the norm. And part of what's going on is, as you look at that, we're going from being an agrarian society where everybody lives out in the country somewhere and works on a farm. You don't need to go to school for a long time. I got my letters, I'm good, right? To essentially an urban society where the workforce is a industrial workforce, requires a different level of education, and as we move forward, it's a information workforce as you get past 1970. Total fall enrollment in degree granting institutions by attending status and sex of students, 70 through 2010. Our total over here in 1970 is 8 million and some change. Over here by 2010, 21 million. So that is a pretty huge change in 30 years. The population of the United States is pretty static. It doesn't really significantly change over that time period. So the amount of them, the percentage of people going to college is going up big time. Somewhere around 1985, 1990, the percentage of college students shifts to be more female than men. And that change has not, it hasn't gone down since. It's continuing to grow. Total fall enrollment in degree granting institutions by attendance, status, sex, and age. What we see is, once again, these numbers continue to blow up, but what happens is older students continue to grow more. There's more older students going to school now than there's ever been on a percentage basis. Fall enrollment at your degree granting institutions, hey, there's some numbers you can read. Once again, 1970, 8 million, up to 18 million in 2007. So it's a nonstop trend that colleges are trying to go, how do we deal with this growth? We want the growth. We want to be the place they're coming, but how are we going to accommodate that? It's not a stable environment that you go, okay, we've got this thing that steadies. At the same time this growth is going on, you also have colleges that are going out of business. There's plenty of colleges in the United States of America, what's called tuition dependent, where if they don't have enough folks come in, they can't pay the bills. They don't have a Harvard endowment. Probably the most best known in recent years was Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, there's Antioch University here in Seattle and a few other places where they are an offshoot, if you will, of Antioch College, but the actual college itself, which was founded by Horace Greeley in about 1856, which was considered, it's institutions of higher learning in America. It was a pretty radical institution. They shut it down 5 years ago because they didn't have enough students. They deferred all the maintenance, so every building was falling apart. So that's going on. At the same time, this is going on. So there's a lot of conflicting forces here going on. Okay, percentage distribution of students enrolled in degree-granting institutions by race and ethnicity, we have a total of 100%. In 1976, it's 82.6% white folks. We're now at 64.4% white folks. And the reason for that is not, if you recall, it's not because we have less people going. So what's happening is we are having a larger minority population coming to higher education, which that's a good thing. If you looked at the trend line, if you think back to who was going to college, it used to be, it was white males. That's pretty much who went to college, if you go back in the founding days of higher education in America. So we're becoming more, even in our demographics, more egalitarian. So who gets done? Who gets to the finish line? Here's the population 25 years or older with a high school diploma. And 1940, 24% of everybody in America had a high school diploma. Still, they could go to World War II just fine with a high school diploma or without. We see that start to steady growth as we move ahead. And part of that, of course, is it's not 80% didn't graduate this year. It's the people, all those people that were below this in 1920, or the last Civil War veteran long since went away, that never went to high school. And there's those things happen over time. That's a population shift. The percentage of population 25 or over with a bachelor's degree. So once again, you look to 1940, it's a very small percentage. 4.6% of our population in the United States says, I've got a bachelor's degree. 2000, where a quarter of the population has a bachelor's degree. And here we go, percentage of 25 to 29-year-old with a bachelor's degree or higher by race and ethnicity. And so once again, the trend line going from 1971 to 2009 continues to go up across all population. Some 6-year graduation rates. When people look at graduation rates, there's a thing called IPEDS, that Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data is what IPEDS stands for. And in IPEDS, they look at completion rates, and that's a Department of Education thing, right? And the standard, the norm, what they look at is within 150% of enrollment time, and they only look at first-time students, first-time freshman students. So that's the kind of default standard of what's looked at in this kind of data, but it's become increasingly more and more, doesn't really tell you what's going on. Because first off, it doesn't track transfer students at all. It doesn't track students that, if they go in when they're 18, go for 2 years, drop out for 5 years and come back, they're out of the mix, because even though they may come back and graduate, they may earn a doctorate, such as your president here. I don't count in IPED statistics. I'm just, if you go back to when I was 18 years old, I'm just one of those drops. End of discussion. They don't ever enter that back in, but it tells you something. This chart is showing you, it's either started as a 2-year or a 4-year student, right? And whether they earned any degree or not. And as you can see, there's a significant advantage to starting as a 4-year student in this data. If you started as a 2-year student, the odds of getting a bachelor's degree are a lot less. You see, females graduate at a higher percentage. Interestingly, they don't as 2-year students. The thing that you look at the trend line that's moved the most on anything in the last 15 or 20 years is actually Hispanic students, who have historically been our worst completers, are improving. You don't see that in this chart. 4 or 6-year attainment rates by gender and race. Once again, 6 years that's that 150% mark when they look at that in IPEDS in terms of, do they get done? Because it used to be, in theory, people went to school and graduated in 4 years and got out and made America stronger and more prosperous and all those good things. And what's happened over the last 20, 30 years, more and more students are taking longer to graduate. Now, of course, some legislators would like to think it's because they're all just goofing off and taking extra classes that don't count while they're taking underwater basket weaving because it's so much fun. But that is, and I don't think that's happening more or less than it's ever been. I think probably one of the big factors is finances for students. If you look at students that are trying to go, okay, how can I responsibly finance my education, you've got more and more students working than we ever used to have. The idea of an 18-year-old student that mom and dad are funding and they send them off to school for 4 years, to go have fun the first 2 years and then get serious the last 2, that's really pretty much gone away. There's still some of those students, but more and more we have folks that are working, so that in itself extends their time getting their degree done. And there's plenty of data out there, by the way, as an incidental note, that the longer you take to earn that degree, the less likely you are to earn it. So that's the yin and yang of the whole thing. That's the danger. Yes, I've got to be able to be fiscally responsible. I've got to pay the bills while I'm going to school. At the same time, you want to get to the finish line. So if you look, it's a huge difference right now. All students, 36%, get done in 4 years. That's not many compared to getting close to 60 in 6 years. So realistically, you're seeing students 5 to 6 years to complete a bachelor's is fairly typical nowadays. And I've said that actually Hispanic is a place there's a problem, but actually it was in the previous chart. American Indian has more completion challenge probably than any other population of our minority populations. Education attainment by socioeconomic status. Does it matter whether your parents are rich? Well, let me just say yes. If you look overall, the total over there, you go, okay, purple is no post-secondary education, reddish is some post-secondary education, no bachelor's, yellow is a bachelor's degree, and the little thing that's supposed to be blue but looks like white is master's degree or higher, right? That's our general population is total, right? If you look at the lowest quartile, that's our next one over, you go, okay, how does that track out? And you go, okay, we've got 48% of those folks never go to college at all. And this is, I believe, 2009, yes. So that's pretty recent. And you've got 7% with a bachelor's degree, and that the master's degree or higher is so skinny, you can't even see anything but a black line up there. Whereas if you go over here to the highest quartile, folks with money, 51% have a bachelor's degree. That's a huge difference. So that's something when we go, as a society, is that something that matters to us? And right now we're in a society where the division between rich and poor is actually growing. That's what we are seeing. There's a greater stratification of that going on right now than there's ever been. I won't say ever, but certainly over the last century than there's been. And you have to expect this will follow those trend lines. So how do we as a society go, if we think it's important to educate our entire population, how do we do that? How do we get past those barriers? Here's our percentage of folks with a high school diploma. Similar to other trend lines we've seen, 1940, it's about 26%, that's male and female. Now we've got the percentage of the population, we're up to 80. But if you look at historically in 1940, or 1950, and even 1960, the amount of work, there was well-paying work that was available to folks that didn't have a high school degree. There was better paying work for men. You know, there was more motivation for those guys to go out and take an industrial job that they could support a family on than there is now. That's not to say there's none of those jobs. There are more manufacturing jobs in the last year have actually been on the rise in the United States of America, which is kind of reversing a trend of the last, 20 years? But it's still, that's a big change. Percent of population 25 years or older with a bachelor's degree or more by sex. So once again, we go back to 1940. It was pretty darn unusual. And we're about a quarter of the population now. So I don't think that trend line, I don't think we're going back to 5% anytime soon. I think that's, the thing that's interesting, though, as this has gone along, is a bigger population holds a bachelor's degree or higher. We see it now less as a public good. We go, that 26%, that 22%, well, they're the ones that are benefiting from that. One of the things I do know from General Census Bureau data is that in the United States of America, women live longer than men do by a fair chunk. I think it's about 10 years right now. And so there is a senior citizen population that is those people from 1940 that didn't get a college degree that's weighting that statistic as part of what our population is. Percentage of adults 25 or older with education beyond a bachelor's degree, and this goes from 1960 to 2009, more than triples in that period. Once again, same trend line. Percentage of young folks, advanced degree holders by gender. And this is a little different to look at. So this is master's, professional, or doctoral degrees, right? And you go from 1960, it was 78% men. If you look at the raw number, here you've got 416,000, and you go up to 3 times that, over 3 times that, almost 4 times that by 2009. But the big shift is it goes from 78% men to 58% women. So it's not just, it goes 4 times more folks, but it is women are holding those higher degrees. And in certain fields, they're probably more so than others. So factors that predict completion that are worth considering as we, as educators, think about how do we help our students complete. Because we're in an environment where people are taking on more debt. And I go to orientation several times a year. And I talk to students, and I look at those students, and I don't see any of them that have come to go, you know, I'd like to come here, go for a while, take on a bunch of debt, and drop out. That's not why they come here. They come here to graduate. They come here because they believe, they got ideas about their future. As they go, I got some idea where I want to go, how I can get there, and I believe an education is going to help me get there. So, but not all of them graduate. We've already seen that. So that means a lot of people decide they want to do that, but they can't pull it together for whatever means. So my deal, if the world was my oyster, 100% of my students would graduate. That's why they're here. However, I'm completely unwilling to compromise the rigor of their degree to get there. For my 100%, my imaginary 100%, they all have to earn it. But it's really challenging for some folks. So the questions are, what things can we look at to think about how we can help them be more successful? So part-time, full-time status. That is a yin-yang thing, as we talked about earlier. The idea that, yeah, there's more students working because they're trying to manage their economic situation, but the reality is people are taking longer to graduate. And the longer you take, the less likely you are to graduate. For the simple fact, stuff happens in life. And our great plans aren't always perfect plans, and things happen. So sometimes it's just life happens. Sometimes it's they just can't get along that far. But the reality is, if you can stay on track, or even better, Scott Carnes, who is the Vice President of Academic Affairs at the Art Institute of Seattle, has served on his dissertation committee. And his dissertation was essentially about, is it good for students to take high credit loads, to take extra credits, more credits, a higher credit load? And the simple answer was yes, in terms of getting to completion. Beyond the simple thing, well, obviously you've taken more credits, so you're closer to graduating. Beyond that, they persisted better because they were more committed, more involved in their studies. Race. You cannot say in the United States of America, race doesn't make a difference. Now, you can make a big case that a lot of that's tied to socioeconomic status because we are not everybody plays on the same playing field in the United States of America at this point. We've certainly made a lot of progress in my lifetime towards that, but the reality is it still makes a difference. Socioeconomic status, you can look at that because you can disaggregate it from race and see what that impact is. And, you know, I can tell you there's, you know, my background personally, there was a word when I grew up for what we called my socioeconomic status. It was poor. That's what we were. I remember wearing hand-me-down clothes when I was a kid that my mom got at the church, right? And that, you know, so that's nothing new, but I can tell you, but I went to college and I did some of those things because there was a fair amount of support mechanisms in the United States of America for that. And it's getting, you know, there's still plenty of that. Right now, if you want to go look at a Pell Grant situation, right? And you want to go to start out at a community college, even though we did say earlier your chances of getting a bachelor's are less, but you can still go to a community college for very little money with Pell Grants if you're of low socioeconomic status. That is the reality of it. Yes, sir?
I see a question there. Kind of putting that together with some of the things you were saying earlier about, you know, we got the shrinking middle class, but then also the new norm of 6-year degree completion as opposed to 4. Could you speak to, have perceptions caught up there, right? So we've got people who are needing to find work, struggling to find work, and that's impacting how long it's taken them to complete their degrees, right? Because I'm wondering, what's the, in working with undergrads, I don't think their perception is it's going to take me 6 years, right? The perception is still, it should take me 4, right?
Sure.
So just kind of curious, could you speak to that?
Well, to some extent, you've got folks, when economic times are tough, there's always a certain percentage of people that go, I'm going to go to school for a while and hide out until it gets better, right? That's a good opportunity to improve my skill set. But the reality is, everybody that goes to school, I mean, we have this picture, I won't call it the Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet 1950s picture of going to college, but that's still kind of how we think about it. You know, we go, that's what you do, you go to school and you graduate in 4 years. And it's one of the things when I talk to students, new students, I try to talk to them about planning their lives. Jeffrey, who's sitting right here, works with our students all the time. Go, how do you plan your life to be realistic about that? Because you know, you've got adult learners in your classes that I would guess that a small percentage of them have parental support. You know, they're pretty much paying their way through either by working, through loans that they'll have to pay back, etc. And so they're trying to balance those things. And you know, maybe we can do a better job about making them more realistic about how long it's going to take. But I'd also like to see, can we do a better job of getting them closer to 4 years without compromising their education? You know, to me, you know, not only do I want everybody to graduate, but I would like them to graduate with the least debt possible. You know, I don't see. I used to, when I worked at the Art Institute of Seattle, I would have young students come to me to drop a class, right? And they would say, you know, just going to sign this paper. It's nothing. I'm going, this isn't real money. It's just a piece of paper. I said, no, this is real money. Let me tell you how many Dick's Deluxes this is. This is money you're going to have to pay back later, and you don't think about it now because you didn't take it out of your pocket. You didn't go, here's real money. So I don't have an exact answer, but it's a balance that I think we have to get better at. First generation student, huge predictor of college success. Are you the first person in your family to go figure out how college works? Or do you have someone in your family that's already gone there? You know the drill, right? And I can tell you, in my own house, both my kids had a very different expectation about college than I did growing up. And I've never once said to them, you have to go to college. But that's what's normal to them. They grew up in a house where their dad worked at a college. So, of course, that's what you do. Whereas their immediate cousins, they've all kind of eventually got around to it, but they didn't grow up in that same kind of household. That I'm the first person in my family to have a bachelor's degree, to have a master's degree, to have a doctorate. Rigors of high school. Cliff Adelman's guy, he works for the Department of Education, and he does these great studies, and he's got this study. Answers in the toolbox about bachelor's education. I love Cliff Adelman. Number one thing, not number one, but one of the most important things is the rigor of your high school when you go to college. You're better off to be the worst student at a really good high school than the best student at a really crummy high school in terms of being successful in college. And that's basic statistical data, is the kind of environment they're used to working in. Math attainment, still strong predictor of college success. Our college, how many people are terrified by math? And that's every college. That's not uncommon. There's a guy, Alexander Aston, UCLA. He's been doing longitudinal studies on college persistence since about 1970. And his basic deal, 84% of college completion is who comes through your front door. It's what do they bring to the table, whether or not they're going to complete. Now, some people could go, well, we're doomed. You know, I can't do anything about that. But that leaves 16%. That's a huge number in terms of what you can impact. Is that if I can impact 16% of the population in higher education and make them more successful and get them to graduate, that's an awesome thing. That changes the dynamic of who we are as a country, as a society. That's worth doing. The other trend that's worth taking a look at that you're probably familiar with is our Hispanic population in America. There's 2,000, or about, what, 12%, something like that. And you look by 2050, about 25%. That is a changing dynamic in terms of just our overall population. And if you look, Hispanic students have not been good completers compared to many other demographic groups. One of the big reasons for that, huge first-time student population. So they don't have a family tradition at a high percentage level of going to college. So that's a dynamic that you expect will change over the next 40, 30 to 50 years, but that's still part of who we're going to be educating in this century. What can we do? Well, there are a lot of things that we can do, and this is just really a small list, but there's tons and tons of research out there. It's almost entirely on undergraduate education. There's not a lot of research on graduate persistence, but there's some. And that's a place that certainly is worth looking at more as we go forward. Freshman seminars, those kinds of things. We have ASP 100 at our college, but it's a basic college skills class. One of the things I talk to students, I talk to our advising staff about is you have to change people's habits. If you have somebody that's gone through the K-12 system, has 12 years of schooling, and they've been able to get through with really, really poor habits, and they come to college, and you go, okay, this is our expectation, and good luck with that. Some of them are going to fail because they're just not going to be able to make that adjustment. The theory I've read somewhere, I don't remember where, you have to do something for like a month or something for it to become a habit. So if you brush your teeth every day for a month, you'll keep doing it. If you don't, you'll look like one of those guys they dig up out of the peat bogs with, they've got tartar on their teeth that thick. And it's not any different when it comes to how people organize themselves, their study habits, all those things. They need to become norms for those individuals. You have to change how they think and act. Mentoring, there's lots of data out there, lots of studies on mentoring, particularly around minority groups, where it's very successful in terms of helping people get that, make that connection with the college. When you look at who stays and who doesn't, right, it comes down to, in some ways, as simple as, are they part of who we are? Do they feel like they're at some place where they're other, or are they us? Us stays, other has a hard time staying. So in theory, the student that's got the Argosy t-shirt, you know, they've bought in. They're good. That's why, you know, at least that's one reason why colleges have football teams, so everyone will go out and go, I'm a Husky, which I am. I'm not one of those dreaded Cougars like one of our audience members here. It's that bonding thing. Are you part of the gang? Are you part of the troop? And so mentoring can help that. Early interventions. Don't wait for stuff to go wrong. You're heading towards a cliff, heading towards a cliff. There's a point, no, you're just going over the cliff. And it's they'll throw the life preserver over the cliff and see if you catch it. A little late then. Faculty development on retention. There's a lot of data out there because if you look at where's the rubber meet the road? It's faculty and students. That is what education is about. People like me are basically extra baggage. That's not to say, you know, you don't need presidents, you do. But education is about what happens with students, other students, and faculty in a learning environment. So if you can train your faculty who are going to spend more time with your students than anybody else to understand retention and how retention works, you can see a result. Paying attention. Sometimes it's no more complicated than paying attention to something that's going wrong. And many years ago, when I started out, I had a department chair that he would be asked, he would be told by the dean, your department persistence is down. You know, what's going on? It's a problem. And he'd come up with some, what I would think of as a cockamamie idea, right? Like, we're going to give away a fish to improve persistence. You know, and we never actually gave away a fish, but I'm saying something that as unrelated as that, right? And whatever he did, it would improve. Some things work better than others, but it was the idea, the simple act of paying attention to it. So we're going to focus our attention on it, even if we do it in a ridiculous way, makes a difference. The idea that we're going to, this is something that's important enough that we're going to focus our attention. And the last thing on my list here is develop a plan that is appropriate to your institution and execute. So the idea, we are not, at Argosy University, Seattle, we are not a community college. We are not the University of Washington. We are not Harvard. We're none of those things. We have a different student population that has different needs. And so how do you work with that population? So what's a plan that you want to make to work and make that happen, whatever the characteristics of your institution are? And when I say execute, you're forever going to be revising as you move forward and you'll find what things work, what things don't work. It never ends. I guess maybe that's a little job security that it never ends. When you look at this, I mean, you're looking at what is the future of the United States of America. I mean, it rests with our higher education system. And when you look at what country do you want to be, it rests with our higher education system. They used to be somebody. But, you know, they're a quaint place now that used to be somebody. And our day will come where we used to be somebody, because that's kind of how societies work. But it's a question of how long that run, what kind of country do we want to build, because we're going to change no matter what. Our population's going to change, our dynamics are going to change in terms of how those populations interact. So what kind of country do we want to have? What kind of future do we want to build? I welcome any thoughts or questions.
I believe yesterday in the New York Times there was an article of a professor, or not a professor, I can't remember who he was, but he was writing about the strikes in Chicago and the education. And he basically argued that the two biggest problems are we're not training, in America, we're not training teachers to teach. And so our educational systems, college systems, don't teach future teachers how to teach. And then two, he also argued that, and we're not paying them anywhere near enough money relative to the previous years. On an socioeconomic status, they've dropped well below the other professions. So yeah, what do you think of that idea?
Well, I think number one, that we never have taught anybody how to teach. On the overall, it's something that we generally, our system, regardless of, well, it's not entirely true. Some for K-12 stuff, there's actually a fair amount of training depending on what it is. But on the overall, our approach to higher education is be an expert in some subject matter and go have at, right? And I mean, there's a book by Mary Ellen Weimer about learning-centered teaching that I think is a fantastic book that talks in the beginning of it about that journey that teachers make. You know, how you start out as the fountain of knowledge to someone that is really interested in how people learn. And that's and it's a pretty natural and common journey that educators make, but we really don't teach people that anywhere. We just say, here you go, here's your class. Particularly in higher education, not so much in K-12. I think we have always undervalued teachers in our country in terms of how we pay them. But I do think that has accelerated over the last 100 years. But I don't have an easy answer for you. It's not, it's a question of what do we value as a society? And what are we willing to pay for as a society, and what are we willing to reward? In our current presidential election, there's discussion about teachers, and we value teachers, and we don't value teachers' unions and that kind of stuff because it's seen as a teachers' union is somehow unproductive. But I'm pretty sure the members of the teachers' union are teachers. That's who's in there, right? It's just a bunch of communists join that. That's not, and so there's a pretty weird dynamic in our society and how different people look at those things. And we've been struggling as a society for really the last, well, okay, my entire life we've been struggling as a society to how do we educate young people in particular, K-12, because that disparity, that education gap in our society, I think how we look at it has changed over time, but I don't think we have a solution yet. You know, I don't think, you know, as long as it's tied to financial inequities, it's really difficult. The state of Washington, it's in our Constitution that we fund higher education, K-12 education. That's a constitutional main thing. If you go to any K-12 school in Seattle, Washington, or wherever, you go, are they all the same? Are they all funded equally? They are not. Because it's about whose kids go there and whose parents go there. If you go to the APP school in Seattle, which is the, 1% best testing kids, guess what? They tend to have parents where they're highly motivated, have some money, and so they have like a student-parent association that brings in piles of extra money for that school for stuff. If you go out to some schools that are, I lived by a school in West Seattle, the students mostly came from the projects. And you went to those schools, there was no parental involvement, there was no any kind of student-parent association that did anything there. It was people who are just trying to deliver the baseline. And that's in Seattle, Washington. If you go to Patterson, New Jersey, you think Seattle, Washington's pretty equal. You know, there's places in the United States that have more disparity in those levels. So there's not a good answer other than, you know, we just need to keep working on it. Thank you so much for coming in today. We've got our challenges, but I remain eternally optimistic we will get there. Thank you.